So good afternoon, everybody. I'm Julie Andrews. I'm the Key Account Manager for BCS and Health and Care. So welcome to our webinar today on how COVID-19 is changing digital transformation in the NHS. So hosting this afternoon's webinar is Brian Runciman, Head of BCS Content and Insights. And I'd like to introduce to you also our panel. So we have CIO for Health Education England, James Freed. Good afternoon, James.
Hi, Julie.
James is also the Director of Programs for Building a Digital Ready Workforce and is responsible for the delivery of digital readiness to 3 million staff in England. So yeah, fairly big task in that, James. Joining James this afternoon is Lisa Emery. Now, Lisa is the Royal Marsden Foundation Trust CIO. Lisa is currently leading an infrastructure refresh at Royal Marsden as well, and she's the chair of the London CIO Council. She's also a strong advocate for the evolution of the health CIO role. So I'm sure some of that conversation will come up this afternoon as well, Lisa. So thanks for joining us.
I don't doubt. Hello.
And joining Lisa and James is also Stephen Slough. Now, Stephen is the CIO for Dorset CCG, Dorset County Hospital, and Dorset Healthcare University Foundation Trust. Stephen has experience in both the public and private sector, and he's also an advocate for the development and recognition of digital staff in his organisations and striving for a more structured career development. And I think as well, the questions that will come out of today will very much sort of focus in some of those areas. So before I hand over to Brian, I just want to encourage you to send through questions. You can do that through the webinar. So send your questions through to us. We've had a really good response to the webinar today with over 200 people registered. So that's really incredible. So clearly the content was right. So we'd be quite interested to hear from you as well on the sort of content you want BCS to deliver around this sort of thing in future. So please feed through some of your ideas around that as well. So with no further ado, I'm looking forward to this conversation this afternoon. I'm going to now get the face out of the screen and leave it to you to carry on. So Brian, over to you.
Thank you very much, Julie. So yeah, there's a fascinating subject we're looking at. So we've divided this up into sort of two broad areas. First of all, let's just talk about the here and now and what's happening now. And then we want to look at the sort of nearest future. And obviously there's going to be some overlap as we have this conversation. But the first question we had down here was, first of all, what are the digital respirators? We've heard about the respirator issue. So what are the digital respirators? What IT provisioning is a struggle right now for NHS? Perhaps we could start with you, Lisa.
Well, if I wanted an equivalent of a digital respirator right now, it'd probably be a laptop, and I don't doubt anyone would have the same experience. So some of it's been the physical hardware and just the ability to get that in at scale. The network provision, clearly. So we were in the middle of a network refresh, which we haven't been able to complete, and so we're now throwing a huge amount more at something that is already a little bit creaky. And then a pressure point's really around the technical capacity of the team that I have to be able to respond at the sort of pace we've needed to. So it's the classic, isn't it? The people and the tech, but the hardware has been a real difficulty and a real sticking point, and has led us to sort of think a bit differently about how we offer solutions.
And how about you, James? Same experience?
So I guess I present a slightly different perspective. So I work at an arm's length body, so I'm not responsible for a frontline organisation. But what I do see for colleagues across the patch really is, and not just in healthcare, I might add, is obviously a clearer, very more pressing requirement for home working, and that in terms of the pressure that all industries have been facing. It's how on earth do you suddenly go from a position where the default place of work is the office to the default place of work is the home? Clearly that's not true for key workers who need to be treating patients at this time, but nonetheless every organisation, including health and care frontline organisations, are struggling with how to extremely rapidly work remotely. I guess the other part of this is and if I could use the respirator analogy as something that is absolutely critical and crucial and is being used a lot more than normal, is video consultations. One of the things that clearly we've all noticed is a massive upsurge in the necessary use of video consultations, and I've been particularly interested in what that means for the cultural changes in the organisations we run, and maybe we could talk a bit about that later.
Okay, lovely. Now, actually, Stephen, you joined us a couple of weeks ago when we were talking about business continuity. This exact subject came up, didn't it, about a lack of certain bits of hardware. How's it developed in the last couple of weeks since you've spoken? Are you having a similar experience to Lisa?
Absolutely, yes, and whether respirators is a good parallel to draw, but it's almost the equivalent of the digital equivalent of a toilet roll, I suppose, because when this all landed and started to become popular, everybody ran out and bought every single laptop and headset and everything else they could buy. And as a result, there's none left now, although supply is starting to come back in. But absolutely, as we said a couple of weeks ago, laptops are in high demand. And when suppliers are offering you desktops, even if they're at a reasonable rate now, people are saying no, because they're not portable. You can't carry them around. And that's the mode that we've now all moved into. And as a result, doing things like this, headsets are exactly the same. People want to have a headset so they can sit at home. We've kitted out a number of our offices. I've got them, well, you can see that 2 monitors on my desk here, and we're already having people who are now working at home saying, hey, they don't want to go back into the office. They quite like being at home more. And could they please keep the monitors at home that we've purchased? And, you know, if they need to come back into the office, can we buy them 2 more to have on their desk in the office? So, yeah, there's been a significant change, and you see it very much from those organisations that had planned for something like this, and those who are now having to rapidly staff up, knowledge up, and equip themselves to be able to deal with this. So.
You just started moving in the direction there, Stephen, of some of the positive side effects that are happening here. And so perhaps you just carry on that conversation with you initially. There's been a change in the speed of decision making required, maybe reduction in emails and that sort of thing, more responsive comms. So what do you see as the positive benefits of what's happening at the moment?
Well, definitely that speed of implementation, and I think one of the biggest keys that's come along to this has actually been some funding. I think if you'd sat down and had a conversation about what would you do if this time last year and asked the 3 of us maybe the same questions, we'd all have said, well, we do this, this and this, but we'd need to have more money to be able to make that happen. So I think when we got to the position where you now need to take N thousand people and they need to be able to work remotely, and you've got a week or something to sort it out, we've actually been given the money to be able to make that happen. And I think a lot of the unlocking of what we need to do has been possible because of the fast decision making, the removal of some red tape, and the access to the funds to do what we know professionally we need to be able to deliver. We've been able to move away from limiting services with VPN tokens to machine-based certificates and things like that, just because we know we're going to get the funding to enable it to happen, and there aren't enough VPN tokens left to be able to use, frankly. So yeah, there's been a huge positive impact to digital services as a result of this in an odd way.
Same experience for you, Lisa?
That's an interesting one. So I'm in a really privileged position, I think, being in a foundation trust, that we had a pretty decent self-funded strategic budget, and what's actually been the driver and the change here, as much as receiving that funding earlier than we'd expected, has been the pace of change and the cultural change. So I've got really much closer to clinicians. I did try and spend as much time with the clinicians as I could, but I've become much closer to them, and what I'm seeing is the decision making is being driven by clinicians asking for those digital tools and wanting the pace of transformation to move much faster. So where I might have struggled with that potentially, even over the last year, I've had the funding, and now actually the change itself is being really embraced by the clinical body, and we're getting a lot of positive energy out of that from that team, asking us to promote the change much faster. So it's almost been a slightly reverse, same sort of experience, but it's been great to have that being the driver.
Yeah. James, as you have a more of an overview, what feedback have you had on those positive sort of stories, as it were?
Well, so at first, when they say necessity is the mother of invention, I think what we have got is a whole bunch of inventions, and necessity in this case is the mother of adoption. Someone was telling me that in the video consultation space, we have seen 10 years worth of change in a 2-week period, which seems absolutely phenomenal. But when everyone has absolutely no choice as to adoption of certain technologies, then you quickly determine that the imagined problems or even the very real problems either very easy to overcome or just something that you can accept if it's absolutely necessary. I guess in terms of other positives, a shared purpose has always been one of those things which is extremely important when you're managing any sort of change. And, you know, we've got the most important shared purpose here to save people's lives. I think that what I see at a national level and to an extent actually across the entirety of the NHS and social care is firstly a real desire to collaborate and learn. A real ethos of cross-organisation working. Certainly in the national bodies, the walls between arm's length bodies have almost disappeared. You know, we're working together in the emergency cells, and it doesn't matter what organisation you work for. What does matter is what resources you've got to bring to bear and what expertise that you can add. I think it's also been a real I was going to say ego puncturer. There's no space for ego when there's this sort of emergency, and I think there's going to be a real lasting legacy in terms of relationships, which is a real silver lining to this rather big storm cloud.
Oh, and that's very interesting information, interesting feedback you've given us there. In a moment, we'll just discuss some of the lessons learned that we can take forward. You've obviously alluded to some already. But just first of all, can we just discuss what we might be able to do to give support as individuals? So our audience is mostly IT professionals. There'll be some health professionals on this as well, of course. So what can individual IT professionals do? Perhaps what role could expert businesses that might be having a bit of downtime now due to support NHS transformation? Lisa, can we start with you on that one?
Yeah, sure. I mean, I've had good and not so good experiences on that front. So I think if you look at taking the sort of supplier and provider side on the first front, we've had some really good and positive interactions. So really good recent example with the whole laptop issue. We built a virtual desktop environment very, very quickly, and we needed to call in several technology partners to do that, and they were fantastic. On the flip side, I'm still getting, and I'm sure I've moaned about it on Twitter, as people will know, the emails every other day that say, hey, you've got a bit more time on your hands. Would you like a coffee and a chat about X? And that perception piece around, just try and understand, put yourself in the shoes and have a little bit of insight into how you might help has sometimes been slightly missing. But broadly, I think, suppliers, certainly in my experience, have reacted incredibly well and been really strong partners. Back to James's point, it's been very much, we're in this together. How do we help, save save lives and keep people safe? So that's been a really good experience, I think, broadly. And then on a professional level, I mean, the networks, I'll be honest, have completely come into their own. So, when I talk to colleagues in London or more broadly on advisory panels and networks, the willingness to share, send information across, put people onto each other, it was already pretty good. I think it's just, to me, that's been an absolutely wonderful thing. Even if it's just a quick phone call that says, we're doing this, we're doing it really fast, it's a little bit scary. Are you doing that? Can you give me a bit of advice, even if it's just a little bit of a boost to say, yeah, you know what, we're having the same problem, has been really fantastic, truthfully, I think.
Well, that's excellent to hear. Stephen, is there more that can be done, more support that can be given now? So obviously in that initial setup phase, as things have changed very quickly, there's clearly been support. What ongoing support might you benefit from?
Sorry, you broke up certainly at my end quite a bit there, but is there, could you say it again, please?
Sorry, James and Stephen, I'm getting mixed up now as well. I was just asking about ongoing support. Obviously, there's been a lot of support here in the initial stages. What else can we do as IT professionals in the longer term?
I think as Lisa said, there's been an awful lot of people come through with, I can provide you with this, I can do this now, and so lots of solutions coming out. And I think one of the challenges that we'll face will be to extract which ones of those actually are maybe not something that we can implement now, because you'll need access to both clinical and technical staff to implement anything new now. And lots of the clinical staff are incredibly busy. So, but there are lots of really good ideas. I think James was talking about some of the inventions and interventions which are coming out now, which we can benefit from in the reset or the redesign of what new normal will look like at the end of this. And it's a case of perhaps bearing with us. If we don't come back to you immediately, or come back with a, please leave us for a little while, we need some time to clear the decks a bit more. It's, not to lose faith in trying to engage with us at the moment. If you've genuinely got a good idea that we can see where it will fit into our service offerings in the future, we will be back. Because of all the positives that come out of this, we're hopeful that, this profession, the IT profession, is now, the battle of trying to get it recognised, I think, is probably there. It's for us now to make sure that visibility stays in the right way, so we continue to bring truly value-adding, beneficial solutions into our delivery. So it'll be, bear with us if we don't come back and you do believe you've got the best thing. But also, I think, as Lisa said, if you are going to send us an email and then wonder why we haven't gone back to you about the webinar you've organised for Thursday this week, it's probably because we're a bit busy at the minute. And you'd be surprised how many of those come through.
Couple a day.
But which means that we appreciate you taking the time for this one, actually. So thank you very much for that. I'd just like to think a little bit about the human angle. There's been a steep learning curve for folks with quick change comes a steep learning curve. Lisa, what about the human angle on that? How are individuals coping?
They're doing really well. I mean, you've got. I've got to James's point. It was funny that you said that, James, about necessity being the mother of. I was thinking earlier, it's also the mother of convention. So it's almost like a lot of what we had already. You now find perhaps some of your more difficult user base actually just conforming and getting on and using, and the noise levels go down. So I've been pleasantly surprised by that. The willingness perhaps of what they would openly admit to being some of the more difficult people to deal with, just maybe popping in and saying, actually, I tried that and it worked quite well. Yeah, I think I'll be using that going forward. So it's been a steep learning curve for all of us. It's certainly taught me a lot as well, because my perception of what I think the organisation might need from a technical perspective has in several cases just been blown aside, really, and I've needed to sit and listen and understand that actually perhaps even the simplest little solution is what somebody needs to keep their clinical practice the way they need it to. So I think the sort of the empathetic and listening side of it has come out very strongly for me, even when you are busy and even when you are stressed. Everybody is, we all are. But I'm finding people are willing to be a lot more patient and thoughtful with us as a profession in my organisation as a result of this as well. And that's been a pleasant surprise.
So we're hearing a lot of positive comments from you folks about the internal sort of stepping up to the plate, which I guess is reflected in the larger feelings that even the country have about the NHS. I'm just wondering about the public expectations now from on NHS IT specifically. James, can I ask you about that? Has this shifted the public perception on what IT does for the NHS?
I don't have a tremendous insight on this one. My sense is that the public expect NHS IT to work during a crisis as much as they expect it to work outside of a crisis, i.e. they expect the NHS to know what they have told some part of the NHS at some point in the past, and we're in the same situation now as we were previously. There's a lot of work to go, a lot of way to go. Sorry, I think there are some things that are that have had an impact on the public perception, however, which are not entirely either our, if I can use that phrase to mean the IT group of people, our fault or indeed responsibility. So was watching Newsnight last night about the rather worrying trend in people not using NHS resources for, actually, in some cases, quite serious things outside of COVID-19. People are staying away from GPs, they're staying away from A&E surgeries. Some of those people are going to be the worried well who turn up anyway, and that's good that people aren't misusing services in that way. Some people are those people with very serious complaints, you know, whether it be suspected strokes or heart disease, who just are not getting the attention that they really, really need, and that is a problem. It's having a massive impact on primary care workload as well. I called up for an appointment for my daughter actually last week, and I said very, very clearly in the request, this is low urgency. This is a small rash. It's something that I've been meaning to get around to. Please ignore it if you don't have the time, expecting they'd be completely swamped. And I did that at 10 in the morning, and I had an email message back at 11 saying we can fit you in at 2. And so we did a video consultation, which was great. And then I got the commentary back in an email separately, which told me how I could help manage the very minor condition at home, which was fantastic. Although there was clearly a lot of factors that led to that experience, I very much lay that at the altar of, NHS IT is actually working. This is good. I think the other really interesting thing is, I think the public's perception of the NHS in general is, the NHS has always been, the greatest brand value thing that's ever existed in the UK, but I would never have expected to see every single Thursday people applauding the NHS, and that applause is for us as much as it is for frontline NHS workers.
Yeah, absolutely. Now, Stephen, what's your perception of that? How the public are now are sort of viewing NHS, but specifically NHS IT, if there is such a perception in your area?
So I think there is, and I think the more that we're pushing now, online consultations, as James has mentioned as an example, out there, people will just expect more of it. And you can do a lot now, as we've known for a while, with your bank online. And people have been wondering for a while, certainly in circles here, why they're not able to engage with the NHS in that way. I mean, apart from not recognising that actually it's not really one organisation, it's hundreds of organisations who historically haven't really spoken together too much because they've been in competition with each other, doesn't kind of lend it to all working well together. So it's incumbent upon us to hide that complexity from the public, but also to offer them the kind of services which today demands. And that is a lot more of it will need to be online, available 24/7. That might mean you don't have to go in and see a clinician face to face. You could do it like this. Or you could get advice through some sort of bot online, accepting and fully realizing that won't be for everybody. So it's going to be, again, incumbent upon us to make sure that we continue to provide digital and regular services that people can engage with in a way that's appropriate to them and to their condition. But I think a lot more will be expected now of us, and providing we can have the support nationally and regionally to do that, I think we can make a really good job of delivering it as well.
Lovely. So have you folks seen any interesting examples of some improvisation or responding to challenges that has just made you sit up and take notice? Lisa, can we start with you on that?
Yeah, it's a tricky one, that. I mean, we've put a real emphasis very early on trying not to make too much change, which I know sounds a bit unambitious, but it was very much about, we have a set of systems and a set of processes that work really well. How do we make that work at home? How do we make that work remotely? And how do we keep the lights on? So we were quite strong on that to start with. So it was very much about scaling up home working and making sure nothing fell over at some pace. And I'm sure that'd be the same for everybody else. But what we're now starting to see is, as people have started to settle more into that pattern of working, they're coming to us then with ideas, and that includes from my team as well. So, you know, small things like our treatment clinics, one of the clinicians saying, look, you know, I've got I need to talk to patients about whether they're exhibiting COVID symptoms before we commence on a course of chemotherapy. Lisa, I thought actually I'd come and ask you, because there must be some tools we could use. So it's that they're exploring ideas with us and not using, you know, the idea that IT might be the blocker, but instead coming and saying, well, I've seen what you've done. Can we do something else as well? This could be quite interesting or exciting or useful. So I think it's, to me, certainly in my experience at least, we've focused on the basics, and what we're now seeing is, okay, you know, we think we should go to these guys with some of the new ideas and some other things we might do. So we're only really in our organisation starting to explore some of those, I'd say, but I'm quite excited about some of that.
Interesting. That's very interesting. James, when I asked that question, you smiled.
Yeah, yeah. Well, there were three things that came to mind. So, whilst I completely agree with Lisa, you know, now is not the time to be doing major experimentation and changing processes that work, because it's just a really risky time. But now is also a time where you are forced to make some changes in order to make your existing technology work for the existing situation. And I guess one of those is around. So there are three things that came to mind when you asked the question. The first is around learning at distance. I wasn't going to use the term e-learning because it's got a bit of a bad rep, that particular term, but learning nonetheless through electronic means. Health Education England runs something called e-learning for healthcare. We're currently trying to redevelop it actually into something that's much more collaborative called the Learning Hub, but it's the de facto e-learning system for the entirety of the NHS. We have seen an absolutely tremendous upsurge in use, partly because people have got no other way of getting learning, partly because we produced a COVID-19 specific set of tools, and partly because we made it open access. It was always free, but you had to register, and there was the registration step is always a barrier to use. But we have made it free to internationally as well. And it's really nice seeing those resources support, for instance, the response in Africa. The second that I was going to choose is something around passporting, which you might have heard. So I hope you don't mind me using the phrase peacetime, and the war analogy I appreciate is overdone, but nonetheless. In peacetime, it can take a nurse 6 to 8 weeks to be onboarded when they first start work. Even when this emergency started, there were examples where doctors with known credentials couldn't start work for a day because they had to have the right checks being done. There's a tool that is being developed actually by the Trust in Blackpool, which is a passporting app that enables trusted credentials to be held on individuals. It was being developed in the background, but it suddenly comes into its own when you are trying to take tens of thousands, even hundreds of thousands of people from outside the NHS, either returners, retirees, or students, and make sure that they are who they say they are and they're good enough to do their job, which is essentially what the credentialing does in a trusted manner. So that's been really nice to see. And then the final example, I was chatting to the Chief Information Officer from a major London teaching hospital, who was saying that one of the issues in this emergency is the lack of human contact between families and their very sick relatives. And they've just been experimenting with three-way video consultation. So a nurse next to someone in ICU in full PPE holding up an iPad effectively, a second iPad with the family, and a third iPad with the consultant in a separate location. And that three-way communication, really simple technology, but actually some of the technology they were using was even though it was like 2 or 3 clicks, was too complex. And just this move towards a recognition that in wartime, and why would it be any different in peacetime, the need for a really user-centered, slick, easy to use, and above all simple design is really, really important. And that's why I chose that example as well.
Well, great. There's some great examples. Now we're going over a little bit, but I said we also discussed the near future. So let's just do a couple of other, and then we'll get some questions from the audience. When the dust settles, what may be dropped about the way NHS IT is run, and what might be pursued a little bit more vigorously? Could I start with you, Stephen?
What might be dropped, or what do we hope would be dropped? I guess is the thing. I think we probably have to hope that that some of the red tape and some of the restrictions might be dropped. I think we need to see in the future some easier ways to adopt some new technologies to get them faster in front of people. I mean, we've been, just to go back to the previous one a bit, we've been looking at remote consultations for some time in our community trust. And this situation gave us the opportunity to roll that out, and we actually deployed it into primary care in 36 hours. So the ability to be able to move at that kind of pace, we have to work out a way to be able to keep some of that, even if it won't be quite as fast, at least as fast as it is now, rather than the long time it takes. And I would hope in some ways the ability to have the recognition of some tighter funding in the way we can work, so there's more targeted funding towards IT, and perhaps that we aren't necessarily labelled with the cash cow for savings as perhaps has been seen in the past. A lot of the enablement that we needed to be able to make, certainly in some places, is built on some quite dated technology, because it's always cheaper to not upgrade if it hasn't fallen over. So I think some ways to be able to prepare in the future that we can manage this more effectively in the future, because it will probably happen again at some point, or something similar would be very useful.
Yeah,
we need to be dynamic. Speed has been proven to be the answer.
Yeah. Lisa, have you got any sort of start wishes?
I completely agree in terms of the bureaucracy and the layers we need to go through, and the idea that we drop some of that would, absolutely, and you'll hear that consistently across the board. It's made everything, that little bit of autonomy just allows you to be a lot more reactive and responsive to your teams. So I would certainly want to see that. And from a strategic perspective, I think really we've looked at a couple of what we thought were the right approaches, particularly, funnily enough, back to James's point around things like VC and other areas. And I think we're probably going to drop some of what we thought were strategic pieces of work, actually, and look at what we put in tactically and extend it. And so that's been an eye-opener, but ultimately a positive. So yeah, I'd agree with really what Stephen said. And then there are some small local examples.
And what about the idea then that professional status should be part of the NHS IT profession, Lisa? Has that been pushed along now as a concept as well?
I would really hope this enhances it. I mean, I was already on the path to, and had to put a slight pin in it, to obviously taking up that professionalisation of my own team. I'm very hopeful, actually, that the way that they've been responded to and the way they've responded to this will just further push the case, really, and enhance the fact that, we are being perceived as a profession, part of the command and control process and part of the decision-making process in responses to things like this. I just hope it elevates that status and gains support for that professionalisation.
Yeah, how about you, Stephen? The same sort of idea on the professionalisation of the IT profession in the NHS?
Absolutely. I mean, I've had my CCG team as a professional members now for a couple of years, and I'm keen to get that rolled out to the other teams as well, because they deserve the recognition for the amount of work they put in. Without the work they put in, particularly now, the impact on technology not working properly is front and centre. And if something goes wrong, you hear about it very quickly. So it does deserve to be recognised, and I've long thought that and been pushing for it locally. And as Lisa said, this will help. This is our opportunity to grasp this now and to keep hold of that and to champion it for our teams, both through, I think, the sort of the BCS and the Sophia framework, which is something we're looking at, and more recently with FedIP as well.
James, what's your feeling on that, looking from the point of view of an oversight sort of body?
So I sincerely hope so. So for a long time now, we've seen a growth in a desire, both from within and external to the profession, to become more professional, i.e. being able to articulate what our roles mean, what bar we need to meet, and to accredit ourselves externally and independently, if at all possible, to that bar. That I think one of the tests that COVID-19 is going to give us is when the dust settles, have there been examples of bad practice that could have been spotted or could have been addressed had we had a more professional environment? And I think that it's going to be really interesting to see what comes from that, because that'll provide one hell of a business case.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, that's been a fascinating conversation. I'm going to just bring Julie back in, because I'd imagine we've had some questions posted from the audience. I haven't got sight of them, so perhaps we can bring Julie.
Yeah. We have a load of questions, so it's actually trying to get through. So I'm just going to start with, we're talking about professionalism, which is probably a good place to start. She says, having lost them amongst the amount come through. We'll go to Lisa, actually. Question to you, Lisa. With the increased threat of cyber attacks from, individuals taking advantage of the COVID-19 situation, how has the Trust scaled its resilience to it?
Ooh. Well, that's a good question, isn't it? Because obviously there's had to be a very hefty degree of pragmatism around opening up some of these tools. So a very good recent example of that, and I'm sure there'll be varying degrees of views on it, but something like the use of Zoom and other tools of that ilk. And so for us, it's been about involving our cybersecurity and information governance colleagues and taking a risk-based approach. So doing a quick but a thorough risk assessment and coming out with a balance of benefit. So as an example, we had some discussions about the right kind of video conferencing to use for one of our multidisciplinary team meetings, the upshot of which was that what I discovered was that one of the clinicians was having to drive to a site, open up her mobile phone and hold it at the screen in order to participate in a video conference. Now, the pragmatic sense in that tells you that actually it would be better to use a sensible tool where everybody joins the conference together and you've got the appropriate lockdown than to allow a situation like that to manifest. So it's just been about taking it case by case, consulting with the right people, talking to colleagues in networks and getting some advice, both from the centre and from your peer group, really.
Thank you. Something else there are lots of interesting questions here. We won't have time for all of them, but what does the panel think about post-pandemic, whether there will be a cultural shift in attitude to data sharing and a greater willingness for personal data to be available to things like digital passports? So James, you're referring to doctor digital passports and clinician digital passports before. From a patient point of view, I'm thinking that's coming through. James, do you want to pick that up?
Yeah, so well, with regard to data sharing, I suppose there's two different perspectives on this one. So the first is, although there is clearly an emergency need to share data across organisational boundaries quicker than we have before, and that there has been an element of relaxing of some of the governance that enables us or prevents us from doing that, or adds additional time and bureaucracy to enable us to do that. What will be interesting is how we revert, or whether we choose to revert following the pandemic, and how much of what we have relaxed is safe to do so or not. I suppose the perspective on this, it comes down to specific process that's put in place. So the passporting, as an example, is where we are adopting a bit of technology, a slightly new process, and we're putting our trust in a different approach to, in that case, onboarding of staff. What we have seen before, where people have adopted those sorts of technologies and had some sort of level of consternation, once they've got experience of those technology, it very rapidly becomes part of the social norm. And we don't often see a retraction of those technologies unless something major blows up in our face. So fingers crossed, everything will go nicely, and we'll start to see some really embedded change that follows on from this pandemic.
And that probably follows on quite nicely, I think, to the next question. There has been so many positive changes made. We've heard you talking about those. How do we stop this going back to the way it was? How can we keep this being the new norm? Stephen, do you want to pick up that? It is something
Yeah.
that people are fearful of. I've seen a lot of chatter on discourse, you know, people sort of saying, do you know, if this carried on just a little bit longer, would this be the new norm? Would we be able to continue with this sort of, you know, rate of response and so on? And what does this look like?
So I would hope that when we get to the new normal, which I guess seems to be evolving almost day by day at the minute, when we do this kind of reset or redesign, when we get to return from lockdown, I think there needs to be a lot of the work we put in needs to stick. A lot of the processes we've been able to adopt need to remain, and hopefully we can just continue to build on the successes we've had. So we've developed a system-wide data warehouse in Dorset, which is linking together from all the different local authorities and all the NHS organisations. And because of that, we've been able to develop very rapidly a system-wide COVID dashboard to report on everything from how PPE is being used, whether there are spare beds, how many ventilated beds we've got, and all of that has come together through our internal team using the data that we already have in the system. So I think getting some understanding of what you can leverage and what we've been saying is possible to leverage from what we can already do has now been realised, and I think people are going to start listening a little bit closer now to when we're coming up with these ideas of what we can see is achievable with the technology and with the data, and that will really stick. It needs to stick.
Does anybody else want to feed in on that point?
Just really quickly, I think completely agree with Stephen, and interestingly for me, it's about, you know, I'm getting clinicians now coming along saying, please don't let this go back. We want this to be the new normal, and it's got to come from that clinical and operational voice, and us are now allowing and making sure that we can continue to support it. So if they're pressing for it, it's more likely to happen. So I'm trying to keep them happy and promoting it, really.
If I could just add to that, and just following on from what Lisa said previously around this concept of partnership, you know, the one thing that I'm hoping that we will continue is these brand new relationships we've developed with, in particular, our clinical colleagues, but also senior leaders, chief executives, you know, business functional leaders, and this new parity of esteem that we seem to have established. I mean, I think it's unlikely for us to suddenly shoot ourselves in the foot and break those relationships, but the more that we can do to retain them, the more that we will create this genuine sense of partnership, that we are both sides, if you like, the clinical and the technical, coming together to help solve the very real world problems that we're trying to address.
That's got to be one of the, you know.
If I could come in there as well, just. Sorry, Julie, I was just going to say, let's not forget that just in the shorter term, the vital IT workers, or vital workers we're calling it, but particularly those in IT, BCS are promoting at the moment, just to recognise those people that are making huge, and some people in IT, unsung usually, making huge differences in the things they're doing right now. We've heard some specific examples today from the panel. That we're doing that right now. Of course, it's our job to always show society how much value is being added by IT professionals. We're going to carry on doing that, of course. And in the intervening time, use that hashtag to recommend people that you know have done a great job. Hashtag vital workers. They'll advert there.
Well done, Brian. Have we got time for another quick couple of questions, Brian?
I think we have.
Okay, so that follows on quite nicely. I mean, you know, one of the things was the raise and profile of the CIO, and I think, James, you've probably answered that with your response just then. But that's always been one of the considerations, is that CIOs and head of transformation digital get this recognition, particularly at board level, and having stronger voices at that. Do you think we're going to see more of a sort of a rise toward that recognition where it should have been perhaps before? Are we going to see more as a result of this epidemic that or pandemic, that we're all CIOs promoted, or their voice heard more, should I say?
Yeah, I think so, if we deserve it. So about a third of CIOs are on NHS boards at the moment, but that doesn't mean that every single CIO in this country is deserving of that title, quite frankly. You know, and we are investing in increasing educational opportunities, whether it be the NHS Digital Academy, whether it be the Chime relationship with BCS. There are a number of opportunities where we can start to prove ourselves as senior leaders that happen to have a technical expertise. And I think it's important not only it's not just other people's perspective of us, it's how we hold ourselves and how we operate and how we demonstrate that we are worthy of that parity of esteem.
That's very true. And that probably leads me on to this one, which is our skills or our staff raising skills, or is there a competency deficit that they would like to address either during this time or post, once we get back to normality? Are you seeing a skills deficit, or are you actually seeing people stepping up and finding the skills that you might have otherwise thought that they wouldn't or didn't have previously, finding a way to fix some of the solutions? Stephen, do you want to pick that one up?
So I think there are definitely some gaps, but I think because we've got quite a varied landscape across Dorset, so we've got some people that have got a lot of skill in one area and others who are lacking, and I think that's where some of the relationship pieces coming together quite nicely now. So we're all helping each other out. So those historical boundaries that were mentioned earlier are just not there anymore. So I think that's helping, and we're getting a lot of on-the-job training for some people at the moment. We will be looking, though, more and more at how we plug those gaps more formally long term. And again, how do we make sure we've got sufficient training budget for everybody, and recognising that everybody needs to get the training they need, because with more and more technologies being demanded by our clinical and professional colleagues, we have to make sure we've got the skills in the team to be able to deliver that for them and sustainably maintain it, rather than continually rely on third-party organisations all the time, or just say we can't possibly do that because it's not allowed because of IG or the security won't allow it, the usual excuses that might have come out in the past. We have to make sure we're investing in our people, because that will make them want to stay with us, and we have to be preparing ourselves for the ask that will be coming, hope, in terms of more technology that is demanded to go to the front line.
Lisa, do you want to add anything into that?
Well, yeah, I'd agree. I mean, the other thing as well for me has been trying to sort of not encourage people to put too much of a hero cape on, and actually to put their hand up if they think they've got a great idea but they need some help. So the converse has also been true. Some surprising skill sets have come out and some brilliant responses, but it's also tempering that with, it's okay to say that I don't know how to fix this, but I've got an idea, and then we'll go seek some help, or we'll look for ways to upskill you, or we'll take that forward with you. So it's been a bit of both for me.
Well, thank you very much, everyone.
Well, let me
questions there.
Thank you for that, Julie, much appreciated. I think I can speak. I'll take it upon myself to speak on behalf of the audience. That's been really interesting insight that Lisa, Stephen and James, you've given us. Can we thank you so much for participating today? We've got a real sense of some positive things happening in a very difficult time. BCS are going to continue showing the good practice and all the great stuff that's happening in NHS IT and indeed all IT. So a big thank you on behalf of all those watching and the BCS in general. So thank you for participating. Next week, so it'll be a week tomorrow. That'll be next Wednesday. We have another webinar. The subject is managing unplanned business change. Now, that's not just in the clinical environment, it's a broader one, but it's relevant for a lot of people, isn't it, right now? So we'd like to say thank you, Stephen, thank you, Lisa, thank you, James, and thank you, Julie, for your questions. And we'll hopefully see you next time on our next webinar.
Thanks very much.
Thank you.